She stepped off stage with laughter still echoing in the room. Fearless, brilliant, unforgettable. But as Eurydice Dixon walked home through a quiet Melbourne park, the night took a devastating turn. What began as an ordinary evening would soon ignite a national outcry, leaving a city in mourning and a country demanding answers. This is not just a story of loss, but of light stolen too soon. Stay with us. Eurydice Jane Dixon was born on the 10th of November, 1995. She was described as gutsy, determined, and clever, kind to those she met, and deeply passionate about the arts. Life hadn't always been easy for her. When she was just 7 years old, tragedy struck. Her mother, who had struggled with a heroin addiction, died from an overdose in a shopping center. Eurydice remained close to her family, especially her father Jeremy, her brother Christopher, and her sister Polly. Those who knew her well said she was a born performer. She channeled her personal experiences and creative energy into stand-up comedy, quickly carving out a space for herself in the scene. Though naturally introverted, Eurydice blossomed on stage. Comedy became her way to open up, to express her ideas, and to find connection. Her routines often reflected her intellect and her life's challenges. She was a staunch feminist, but never afraid to poke fun at herself or her own beliefs, bringing depth and humor to issues that mattered. She became a beloved figure in Melbourne's comedy community. One friend called her a comic's best friend, always supportive, always able to find something funny, even when a joke didn't land. Her performances at comedy clubs showed a talent on the rise, and it was clear that Eurydice was becoming one of the most promising voices of her generation. On the evening of Tuesday, the 12th of June, 2018, Eurydice Dixon performed a stand-up set at the Highlander Bar in Melbourne. It was a place she often frequented, and that night her performance went exceptionally well. She left the venue feeling proud, uplifted by the warm response she had received. Afterward, she accompanied her boyfriend Tony to his tram stop and then began her usual walk home, something she had done many times before. As she entered Prince's Park, a place she loved, she removed her shoes and continued barefoot, following a familiar path from west to east. At 12:02 a.m. on the 13th of June, just minutes from the home she shared with her brother and father, Eurydice sent Tony a final message. "I'm almost home safe. How about you?" But less than 3 hours later, at 2:40 a.m., a man walking through the park on his way home from work made a devastating discovery: a woman's body lying in the open field. He immediately called emergency services and began CPR, but paramedics arriving on the scene were unable to revive her. Eurydice Dixon was pronounced dead where she was found. Police quickly sealed off the area and launched a homicide investigation. Detective Inspector Andrew Stamper appealed to anyone who had been in the park between 11 p.m. and 3 a.m. to come forward and urged those with dash cams or surveillance footage to review their recordings. The results of the post-mortem were harrowing. Eurydice had died from asphyxiation caused by neck compression. Her body showed signs of trauma to the head and torso, and there was evidence of a sexual assault. Whoever had done this was clearly dangerous, and they needed to be found urgently. The police advised the public to be more mindful of personal safety, but this sparked widespread backlash. Many criticized the suggestion, saying it placed the burden of responsibility on victims rather than addressing the threat posed by violent offenders. Victorian Premier Daniel Andrews criticized the response, emphasizing that Eurydice had done everything right. She was alert, aware of her surroundings, and acting responsibly. The suggestion that she should have done more was deeply offensive to many. Public anger grew. A makeshift memorial of flowers continued to grow in Prince's Park. Friends described Eurydice as intelligent, funny, and beautiful, while online, thousands expressed their grief and outrage. The advice from police was widely viewed as a form of victim blaming. Recognizing the public sentiment, Victoria's Chief Commissioner Graham Ashton later issued an apology, clarifying that they had not intended to suggest any blame toward Eurydice. Then came a breakthrough. Reviewing CCTV footage from the area, investigators noticed something significant. a young man could be seen trailing behind Eurydice as she walked home. He appeared to be deliberately keeping his distance while staying within sight. Believing this could be their strongest lead yet, police released a still image of the man to the media, hoping someone would recognize him or that he would come forward himself. That evening, a 19-year-old man named James Todd walked into a police station in Broadmeadows. When questioned about his presence in the footage, Todd claimed he had followed Eurydice because she looked drunk, saying he thought she might do something funny. But this explanation quickly fell apart. An autopsy would later confirm that Eurydice had no alcohol or drugs in her system. When questioned, James Todd claimed the night had been vague and confusing, pointing to the scratches on his face as injuries caused by his cat. However, detectives doubted his version of events. After more than 600 questions and continued resistance, police informed him they would obtain DNA and forensic samples. At that moment, Todd abandoned his denials and admitted responsibility, opening the door for the truth to emerge. In the days that followed, public grief transformed Prince's Park into a space of remembrance. Around 10,000 people gathered where Eurydice had lost her life, united in silence and then in song. This act of collective mourning stood in stark contrast to the emptiness of the park on the night of the murder. Across social media, tributes multiplied. Fellow comedians, friends, and members of the public expressed their sorrow and honored her memory. The Highlander Bar, where she had performed just hours before her death, paid tribute to her kindness, intelligence, and unique presence. Vigils were held across the country as people from all walks of life came together to grieve and demand justice. What began as a local tragedy had evolved into a national moment of reckoning, one that questioned how society responds to violence against women and how such violence could be prevented in the future. In the aftermath of Eurydice Dixon's murder, national leaders and tens of thousands of citizens across Australia came together in mourning. At a vigil in Canberra, both the Prime Minister and the opposition leader addressed the crowd, emphasizing that every woman should feel as safe walking through a park as she would in her own home. Nearly 10,000 people gathered in Prince's Park, where Eurydice had lost her life, to honor her memory. As the sun set, the park's lights were dimmed and replaced by the glow of candlelight. The moment served not only as a tribute but also as a collective demand for safety and justice for women. Among those present were individuals who had also participated in vigils for Jill Meagher, another woman murdered while walking home in 2012. The Victorian Premier described Eurydice's death as senseless and evil, a tragedy that echoed the pain of past violence against women. He and his wife joined the vigil, where a soft rendition of Leonard Cohen's Hallelujah marked the end of the gathering. The state government took the moment to urge cultural change, calling for a transformation in how women are viewed and treated in society. The public grief became a broader conversation about gender-based violence and accountability. However, the days that followed brought another shock. Eurydice's memorial was found vandalized with obscene imagery, sparking widespread outrage. The defacement was condemned as an act of extreme disrespect and cruelty. Victoria's Chief Police Commissioner promised justice for the perpetrators, reinforcing that such behavior would not be tolerated. As a symbol of unity and resistance, landmarks across the country, including Melbourne's Town Hall, were lit in orange, the color adopted by the United Nations to represent the global fight against violence towards women and girls. In Parliament, Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull addressed the nation's grief, reaffirming the collective sorrow and emphasizing the urgent need for societal change. He stated that women should feel safe everywhere, on the streets, in parks, at work, and in their homes. The message was clear. Violence against women is rooted in broader patterns of disrespect, and preventing such tragedies begins with a culture of respect. His speech served as both a tribute to Eurydice Dixon and a call for unity, reminding the country that this was not a political matter, but a deeply human one that touched every citizen. While the country mourned, James Todd sat in Broadmeadows Police Station, where the chilling details of the day he murdered Eurydice were being pieced together. On the afternoon of the 12th of June, after finishing his hospitality class, he took a train into Melbourne with a few classmates. He attempted to buy alcohol but was denied for lacking ID. Still determined, he found another store where he purchased vodka and rolling papers. He spent the early evening in Batman Park drinking with his friends until one left to go home. Todd continued alone, buying more alcohol and marijuana from strangers in the park. Later that night, around 8:30 p.m., he and his remaining companions went to Southern Cross Station. There, he bought whiskey and boarded a train headed toward Broadmeadows. While others disembarked at earlier stops, Todd exited at Newmarket and made his way back to the city. By 10:25 p.m., he had returned to Flinders Street Station and started walking toward Elizabeth Street. His movements that night, seemingly ordinary to an outsider, would soon become central to one of the most disturbing crimes Melbourne had seen in years. Around 10:43 p.m., James Todd passed the Woolworths where Eurydice Dixon was standing with her boyfriend, Tony. He continued on to a nearby McDonald's to eat before returning toward the intersection of Swanston and Flinders Streets. There, he saw Eurydice bidding farewell to Tony as he boarded a tram. Standing near the Young & Jackson Hotel, Todd noticed that she was now alone. At 11:08 p.m., he allowed her to walk ahead of him and began following her, carefully staying hidden behind objects and keeping out of her sight. When she slowed down, so did he. Once inside Prince's Park, Eurydice removed her shoes and walked barefoot across the grass, something she often did. It was then that Todd attacked. He approached from behind, grabbed her by the dress and hair, and knocked her to the ground. Eurydice fought back fiercely, scratching his face multiple times, but she was ultimately overpowered. After the assault, Todd applied pressure to her neck for an estimated 5 to 10 minutes, according to his own account. Once she was motionless, he used the front-facing camera on her phone to examine the scratches on his face, staring at them for 10 minutes. Afterward, he made his way to Royal Park Station and fell asleep on a bench around 2:14 a.m. At 3:55 a.m., he walked back through the park, where he defecated on a track before approaching the scene of the attack once more. Police were already present and ordered him to leave the area. By 5:50 a.m., Todd boarded a train home, arriving in his bedroom by 6:37 a.m. There, he began searching online for information about Prince's Park and read news articles about a woman's body being discovered there hours earlier. He later searched for content related to sexual assault and neck compression. At 6:34 p.m., a friend called to say he had seen Todd's face on the news and that the police were looking for him. Todd then looked up the number for the local police station and called to identify himself as the person in the photograph. Accompanied by his girlfriend and her mother, he went to the station where his own mother met him. Despite everything, he told his girlfriend there was nothing to worry about. After confessing to the crimes, James Todd attempted to justify his actions by telling officers that the victim had appeared disoriented and unable to defend herself. He was officially charged with sexual assault and causing the death of Eurydice Dixon. While in custody, Todd placed a call to his father, expressing dissatisfaction with how the attack had unfolded. Disturbingly, he implied a desire for a better outcome in any potential future offense, revealing a deeply troubling mindset. As investigators delved into his background, a series of alarming details emerged. Todd was the middle child among 3 boys and had grown up in conditions described as extremely squalid. The family home was in a state of severe disrepair. Its kitchen floor had partially collapsed, the toilet was non-functional, and every room was filled with garbage. Multiple animals lived in the home as well. His mother struggled with depression, but Todd insisted the home had always been that way. Diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder, he had shown repetitive behavior and an intense fixation on topics like dinosaurs from a young age. At 12, his school referred him to mental health services due to concerns about his emotional well-being and poor social interactions. During his teenage years, he received treatment to manage mood swings and anger but gradually withdrew from home life, eventually sleeping on the streets and moving in with his girlfriend on weekends. While incarcerated, Todd was diagnosed with sexual sadism disorder. Forensic psychologist Professor James Ogloff, a veteran in studying dangerous offenders, examined his case and later spoke publicly about the condition. He explained that sexual sadism disorder is extremely rare and poorly understood. It involves deriving sexual gratification from inflicting pain or even causing death, and it is not necessarily rooted in misogyny. According to Ogloff, Todd's behavior was consistent with individuals whose deviant sexual arousal is fueled by cruelty rather than hatred. The public often seeks straightforward explanations for such heinous acts, but cases like Todd's defy simple answers or easy solutions. An examination of James Todd's internet history revealed a long-standing pattern of disturbing behavior. From the age of 11, he had regularly accessed increasingly violent pornographic material. His searches included content related to so-called snuff films, a term referring to graphic, fictional portrayals of fatal sexual violence. These revelations painted a troubling portrait of someone whose fantasies had long crossed into dangerous territory, particularly the idea of harming a woman in a violent sexual context. On Thursday, the 28th of June, Eurydice Dixon's funeral was held. Friends, family, and colleagues gathered to remember her life and spirit. Those who spoke included her uncle, her sister, and her former drama teacher. Friend and fellow comedian Kieran Butler described her as having the mind of a lawyer, someone capable of understanding opposing perspectives and holding deep empathy, even for views she did not agree with. The memorial reflected the profound impact Eurydice had made in her short life. Shortly after her death, a man was charged for vandalizing the public tribute set up in Eurydice's memory. The offender, Andrew Noltz, expressed anti-feminist views and admitted to intentionally drawing offensive imagery on the memorial. He claimed his motive was to protest what he saw as man-hating sentiments, though he insisted he meant no disrespect to Eurydice herself. In court, he was ordered to complete 200 hours of community service and to attend a behavioral rehabilitation program. The judge also requested a DNA sample from him, stating it was in the public interest. Initially, Noltz was not sentenced to prison. However, after breaching his bail by missing scheduled community service shifts and traveling overseas, the court responded. He was held responsible for nearly $20,000 in restoration costs and ultimately sentenced to 5 months in prison. The sentence reflected not only the severity of his actions, but the broader need to protect the dignity of victims and public memorials from further harm. On Thursday, the 14th of June, James Todd appeared before the Melbourne Magistrates Court. His lawyer initially requested that his identity remain protected, citing the need for time to gather more information about his diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder. The defense also argued that revealing his identity at this stage could put him at risk while in custody and might hinder the integrity of future witness testimonies due to the case's extensive media coverage. The magistrate ruled that only Todd's face would be withheld from publication. No application for bail was submitted, and he was remanded in custody. Months later, on the 8th of November, 2018, despite his earlier denials, James Todd officially pleaded guilty to 4 charges: murder, sexual assault, and conspiracy to commit sexual assault. At 19 years old, he was now facing the consequences of the brutal crime that had shocked the community. During the plea hearing, the court heard from several psychologists who assessed Todd's mental state and risk profile. Dr. David Thomas, speaking for the defense, stated that Todd displayed signs of sexual sadism disorder and posed a significant risk of reoffending. According to Dr. Thomas, during interviews, Todd admitted that the moment he entered the park, he already anticipated committing a sexual assault. He also acknowledged that while he had not definitively decided to strangle Eurydice Dixon beforehand, the thoughts solidified during the attack. Todd even admitted to previously choking a consensual sexual partner but stopping when she asked him to. Dr. Thomas noted that this earlier incident occurred before Todd began consuming the violent pornography that would later influence his crime. Senior prosecutor Dr. Nanette Rogers emphasized this point, arguing that Todd was fully aware of the dangers of applying pressure to the victim's neck. His defense counsel, Tim Marsh, attempted to mitigate the charges by arguing that Todd had not planned to commit murder until the assault was underway. Character witnesses, including Todd's girlfriend and several female friends, painted a contrasting image of him. Despite his upbringing being described as dysfunctional, they consistently described him as kind, respectful, and socially well-adjusted. His girlfriend stated she found James to be a normal and happy person, while another friend described him as outgoing and thoughtful, someone who would offer advice and apologize when in the wrong. These testimonies clashed sharply with the violence of the crime, adding complexity to the court's understanding of the offender. On Thursday, the 14th of June, James Todd appeared before the Melbourne Magistrates Court. His lawyer initially requested that his identity remain protected, citing the need for time to gather more information about his diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder. The defense also argued that revealing his identity at this stage could put him at risk while in custody and might hinder the integrity of future witness testimonies due to the case's extensive media coverage. The magistrate ruled that only Todd's face would be withheld from publication. No application for bail was submitted, and he was remanded in custody. Months later, on the 8th of November, 2018, despite his earlier denials, James Todd officially pleaded guilty to 4 charges: murder, sexual assault, and conspiracy to commit sexual assault. At 19 years old, he was now facing the consequences of the brutal crime that had shocked the community. During the plea hearing, the court heard from several psychologists who assessed Todd's mental state and risk profile. Dr. David Thomas, speaking for the defense, stated that Todd displayed signs of sexual sadism disorder and posed a significant risk of reoffending. According to Dr. Thomas, during interviews, Todd admitted that the moment he entered the park, he already anticipated committing a sexual assault. He also acknowledged that while he had not definitively decided to strangle Eurydice Dixon beforehand, the thoughts solidified during the attack. Todd even admitted to previously choking a consensual sexual partner but stopping when she asked him to. Dr. Thomas noted that this earlier incident occurred before Todd began consuming the violent pornography that would later influence his crime. Senior prosecutor Dr. Nanette Rogers emphasized this point, arguing that Todd was fully aware of the dangers of applying pressure to the victim's neck. His defense counsel, Tim Marsh, attempted to mitigate the charges by arguing that Todd had not planned to commit murder until the assault was underway. Character witnesses, including Todd's girlfriend and several female friends, painted a contrasting image of him. Despite his upbringing being described as dysfunctional, they consistently described him as kind, respectful, and socially well-adjusted. His girlfriend stated she found James to be a normal and happy person, while another friend described him as outgoing and thoughtful, someone who would offer advice and apologize when in the wrong. These testimonies clashed sharply with the violence of the crime, adding complexity to the court's understanding of the offender. Dr. Thomas and Dr. Ogloff offered differing views on whether James Todd showed genuine remorse for his actions. Dr. Thomas argued that after being taken into custody, Todd began to comprehend the harm he had inflicted. However, Dr. Ogloff disagreed, pointing to Todd's deeply concerning behavior after the murder, including searching for information related to sexual assault on the internet and returning to the crime scene. According to Ogloff, Todd had stated bluntly that he felt nothing after what he had done. As the plea hearing entered its second day, the judge began to consider the possibility of a life sentence. Eurydice Dixon's sister, Polly, addressed the court with raw emotion. She spoke of how the crime had completely shattered their family, revealing that she now suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder. Her words were filled with rage over what Todd had taken from them. Eurydice's boyfriend, Tony, also shared his anguish, stating that the murder had forever changed his view of humanity. When handing down the sentence, Victorian Supreme Court Justice Stephen Kay considered all psychological evaluations, particularly those presented by Dr. Ogloff for the prosecution. He acknowledged the expert opinion that Todd had a very limited chance of rehabilitation. Despite Todd's young age, there was insufficient evidence to suggest that his sexual sadism disorder could be effectively treated. The justice also rejected the defense's argument that Todd's autism spectrum disorder reduced his moral culpability. Instead, he ruled that Todd's sexual sadism was the dominant factor behind the crime. In his lengthy 2-hour sentencing remarks, Justice Kay stated unequivocally that Eurydice had been left defenseless and vulnerable, and that the attack was carried out in an unimaginably callous and cowardly manner. He emphasized that the terror Eurydice must have felt in those final moments was beyond comprehension. Calling the crime totally and categorically evil, he said Todd's intentions and conduct struck at the core of the values held by any decent, civilized society. Justice Kay described James Todd's actions in the most severe terms, calling them perverted, depraved, totally and categorically evil, cowardly, and sadistic. While recognizing these facts, the judge also acknowledged Todd's traumatic upbringing as a mitigating factor. A video presented to the court showed the squalid conditions in which Todd had been raised, conditions Dr. Thomas described as among the worst he had ever encountered in his professional experience. Despite this, the judge made it clear that Todd remained a serious threat to public safety and stated unequivocally that, for the destruction of an innocent woman's life, James Todd would spend the rest of his days behind bars. The sentence handed down was life imprisonment with a non-parole period of 35 years. Todd showed no visible emotion during sentencing. Outside the courtroom, Eurydice's father Jeremy spoke to the press. He said he was relieved that Todd was off the streets and expressed hope that one day Todd might truly understand the weight of what he had done. Jeremy extended sympathy to those who still cared for Todd, recognizing that his path was a tragic one, but firmly stated that Eurydice should be remembered for her brilliance, humor, and kindness, not for how her life was taken. Inside prison, James Todd was placed in protective custody due to threats from other inmates. He will undergo behavioral therapy and be prescribed medication for his disorders. However, it was quickly apparent that he would struggle behind bars. He had already experienced conflict and was moved into isolation for his safety. Todd later appealed his sentence, but the court upheld the original ruling. The appeals judges affirmed that a life sentence with a 35-year non-parole period was entirely appropriate given the severity of his crimes and the extremely limited prospects for rehabilitation. In their written statement, the judges described his actions as unspeakably loathsome and cruel, and emphasized that the sentence was not disproportionate, but necessary given the harm caused and the risk he posed to society. In the wake of Eurydice Dixon's tragic death, a series of new scholarships were established in her honor to support emerging female stand-up comedians. The announcement was made by the state government just before the start of the Melbourne International Comedy Festival. Eurydice's father, Jeremy, along with her siblings, Christopher and Polly, released a heartfelt statement expressing their hope that these grants would continue for years to come. They said that Eurydice deeply cared about comedy and would have been proud to see support given to others who share her passion. They also extended their gratitude to the many people who had shown compassion in the wake of Eurydice's passing, people who not only mourned her death but also expressed concern about violence against women, an issue that Eurydice herself had cared about during her life. Susan Provan, director of the Comedy Festival, spoke about the first recipients of the Eurydice Dixon stand-up grants. She described them as bold, funny women who were genuinely dedicated to their comedic craft. They were, she said, driven by an authentic joy for performing, much like Eurydice herself. The grants were designed to honor her promise and ambition as an up-and-coming performer remembered by friends as brilliant, brave, and beautiful, unafraid to tackle difficult topics and known for a booming, joyful laugh that filled every room she entered. Eurydice Dixon had quickly become a bright light in the Melbourne comedy scene. Her intelligence, wit, and keen insight left an indelible mark on those who knew her. Though her life was tragically cut short, her spirit lives on through the opportunities the grants now offer, giving voice and space to young women who, like her, dare to make people think, laugh, and feel. Eurydice Dixon's story is a sobering reminder of the dangers women still face in everyday life, but it's also a testament to resilience, community, and the enduring power of art. Through her comedy, her courage, and the legacy she leaves behind, Eurydice continues to inspire a new generation to speak up, to stand tall, and to create change. If this story moved you, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and explore the other powerful cases we've covered. Each voice matters, and together, we can keep these stories alive, never forgotten.